08:30 hours, December 7, 1941. Washington, D.C. Major General Henry Harley Arnold receives the telephone call at his home. The voice on the line reports Japanese aircraft attacking Pearl Harbor. Arnold asks for confirmation. The voice confirms this is not a drill. Arnold asks for casualty estimates. The voice cannot provide estimates but reports that multiple battleships are burning and aircraft on the ground are destroyed. Arnold asks about the alert status of West Coast air defenses. The voice reports all West Coast airfields are being placed on maximum alert. Arnold hangs up. He stands in his study for 30 seconds, processing the information. Then he picks up the telephone and begins making calls. First to the War Department, second to his deputy at Army Air Forces headquarters, third to the commanders of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Air Forces. The message is identical each time: Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Unknown casualties, unknown enemy force disposition. All continental air defenses to maximum alert. All combat aircraft to be dispersed and armed, all training operations suspended until further notice. Arnold is 55 years old. He commands the United States Army Air Force's 846 combat aircraft, 26,500 officers, $275,000 enlisted men. The force is inadequate for the war that has just begun. Arnold knows this. He has been preparing for this war since 1938, but the preparation is incomplete. American aircraft are inferior to German and Japanese designs in most categories. American pilot training is producing 3,000 pilots per year when the war will require 30,000. American production is delivering 300 aircraft per month when the war will require 3,000. The logistics infrastructure, the maintenance systems, the command structure, all are scaled for peacetime operations, not global warfare. Arnold's task is to transform the Army Air Forces from a modest branch of the Army into the dominant air power in the world. He will have 4 years. The scale of expansion required is unprecedented in military history. By 1945, the Army Air Forces will include 2.4 million personnel, 80,000 aircraft, and 16,000 airfields worldwide. The transformation will require industrial mobilization, technological development, organizational innovation, and personal leadership of an intensity that will hospitalize Arnold 4 times with heart attacks and leave him exhausted at age 59. But on December 7, 1941, these outcomes are future possibilities. The immediate reality is that Arnold commands an air force inadequate for the war it must fight. He has 4 hours before he must brief General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, on the Pacific situation and the status of continental air defenses. He spends those 4 hours on the telephone gathering information, issuing orders, and calculating what is needed. What is needed is everything. Arnold was born January 25, 1886, in Gladwin, Pennsylvania. He graduated from West Point in 1907, ranking 66th out of 111 cadets. He was commissioned in the infantry and assigned to the Philippines. In 1911, he volunteered for the Signal Corps Aviation School at College Park, Maryland. The school consisted of 2 Wright Model B aircraft, 1 instructor, Lieutenant Thomas Milling, and a dirt field. Arnold learned to fly in 2 weeks. He received Fédération Aéronautique Internationale Pilot's License number 29, making him one of the first military aviators in the world. Early military aviation was improvisation. Aircraft were experimental. Engines were unreliable. Crashes were frequent. In 1912, Arnold crashed twice within 3 months. Neither crash resulted in serious injury, but both demonstrated the hazards of early flight. Arnold's commanding officer recommended he transfer to less dangerous duties. Arnold refused. He remained in aviation, learning not just to fly, but to maintain, modify, and improve aircraft. This practical knowledge, understanding how aircraft actually functioned, rather than how they theoretically should function, would define his approach to air power throughout his career. Arnold served in the Philippines again from 1913 to 1916, commanding the Army's 1st Aviation Detachment outside the continental United States. The detachment consisted of 6 aircraft, 8 pilots, and 40 enlisted men. Arnold taught himself reconnaissance photography, wireless telegraphy, and navigation. He wrote the Army's first manual on aviation reconnaissance. The manual was 20 pages long and contained more practical detail than theoretical doctrine. World War I changed military aviation from experiment to essential. European powers deployed thousands of aircraft for reconnaissance artillery, spotting ground attack and strategic bombing. The United States entered the war in April 1917 with 131 aircraft, none combat-capable. Arnold, now a major, was assigned to Washington to help organize aircraft production and pilot training. He never deployed to France. He spent the war managing logistics, coordinating with manufacturers, establishing training schools, allocating resources. The work was administrative, but it taught Arnold how to scale military aviation from hundreds of aircraft to thousands. After the war, military aviation contracted. The Army Air Service reduced from 195,000 personnel and 11,000 aircraft in November 1918 to 10,000 personnel and 1,000 aircraft by 1920. Congress appropriated minimal funding. Aircraft became obsolete without replacement. But Arnold and other aviation advocates, particularly Brigadier General William "Billy" Mitchell, argued that air power would dominate future warfare. Mitchell's advocacy was confrontational. He accused the Army and Navy of incompetence. He staged demonstrations where bombers sank decommissioned battleships to prove air power could defeat naval forces. He was court-martialed in 1925 for insubordination and forced to resign. Arnold learned from Mitchell's failure. Arnold believed Mitchell was correct about air power's potential, but wrong about advocacy methods. Confrontation antagonized senior leaders and politicians. Arnold developed a different approach: work within the system, build relationships, demonstrate results incrementally, and wait for circumstances to create opportunities. This approach was slower, but sustainable. Arnold advanced steadily through the ranks while maintaining good relations with Army leadership and Congress. By 1938, Arnold was a major general and chief of the Army Air Corps. The position gave him authority over all Army aviation, but not independence. The Air Corps remained a branch of the Army subordinate to ground commanders. Aircraft were distributed to support ground operations. Strategic bombing doctrine, the idea that air power could win wars independently by destroying enemy industry and infrastructure, was advocated by Air Corps theorists but not officially adopted. Arnold believed in strategic bombing. He had studied the writings of Julio Duhay, Hugh Trenchard, and Mitchell. He believed that long-range bombers attacking enemy industry would prove decisive in future wars. But he also understood that proving this doctrine required aircraft that did not yet exist. Bombers in 1938 had ranges of 1,500 miles bomb, loads of 2,000–4,000 pounds, and speeds of 200–250 miles per hour. These aircraft could not reach strategic targets deep in enemy territory and return. Strategic bombing required longer range, heavier bomb loads, and better defensive armament. Arnold authorized development of 4-engine heavy bombers in 1938. The specifications were ambitious: range of 3,000 miles bomb load, of 8,000 pound speed, of 300 miles per hour defensive armament sufficient to survive without fighter escort. Boeing submitted a design that became the B-17 Flying Fortress. Consolidated submitted a design that became the B-24 Liberator. Both aircraft exceeded specifications. The B-17 could carry 8,000 pounds of bombs, 2,000 miles at 300 miles per hour. The B-24 could carry 800 pounds, 700 miles at 290 miles per hour. Production began in 1939, but production was small-scale. In 1940, the Army Air Corps received 243 B-17s and B-24s. In 1941, before Pearl Harbor, production increased to 623 heavy bombers. These numbers were insufficient for strategic bombing campaigns. Arnold calculated that destroying German industry would require 2,000–3,000 heavy bombers, conducting sustained operations over months or years. Building this force required industrial capacity that did not exist in 1938–40. Arnold's solution was to leverage American industrial potential. The United States produced more automobiles than any nation, 4.7 million cars in 1940. Automobile factories could be converted to aircraft production. The engineering expertise, machining capability, and assembly line techniques used for automobiles could be adapted for aircraft. But this required government contracts, capital investment, and time. Arnold lobbied Congress for appropriations. He worked with aircraft manufacturers to expand capacity. He coordinated with automobile manufacturers to design aircraft amenable to mass production. The effort was complicated by political constraints. The The United States was officially neutral in 1939–41. Many Americans opposed involvement in European wars. Congress was reluctant to appropriate military spending that might provoke conflict. Arnold had to justify expansion without explicitly advocating intervention. He argued that air defenses required expansion regardless of American foreign policy. He argued that industrial capacity took years to build and delaying meant future vulnerability. He argued that training pilots required time and aircraft, making immediate expansion prudent even if war was uncertain. Roosevelt supported Arnold's arguments. In May 1940, after Germany invaded France, Roosevelt called for production of 50,000 aircraft per year. This was 10 times current production. The announcement shocked manufacturers and Congress. Many considered the figure impossible. But Roosevelt was setting an aspirational goal, signaling that unlimited resources would be allocated to air power. Arnold translated the political goal into operational plans. How many factories? How many workers? How many machine tools? How much raw material? How long to scale production? The planning was complex. Aircraft production required aluminum, magnesium, steel alloys, rubber, specialized electronics, and precision instruments. Each input had separate supply chains, production bottlenecks, and civilian competing demands. Arnold established a production planning office that tracked every component of every aircraft type. The office projected requirements months and years in advance, identifying potential shortages before they occurred. This systematic approach, treating aircraft production as an integrated industrial system rather than isolated manufacturing, was Arnold's major organizational innovation. By December 1941, the expansion was underway but incomplete. Monthly aircraft production had increased from 300 in 1939 to 1,900 in December 1941. Pilot training had increased from 3,000 graduates per year in 1939 to 30,000 per year in 1941. The Army Air Forces had grown from 26,000 personnel in 1939 to 354,000 in December 1941. But the force was still inadequate. Most aircraft were trainers or obsolescent types. Only 157 aircraft were frontline combat types: B-17s, B-24s, P-38 Lightnings, P-40 Warhawks. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor destroyed 347 American aircraft on the ground, reducing combat-ready strength to 810 aircraft. Arnold's briefing to Marshall on December 7th was frank. The Army Air Forces could defend the continental United States against limited raids, but could not project power overseas. Strategic bombing of Japan was impossible. American bombers lacked the range to reach Japanese home islands from any available base. Supporting ground operations in the Philippines or Pacific Islands required aircraft carriers and forward airfields that did not exist. The immediate priority was defense, preventing Japanese follow-up attacks on West Coast ports and installations. Marshall asked Arnold how long to build an offensive capability. Arnold estimated 18 months to 2 years. This estimate assumed sustained industrial expansion, uninterrupted training pipelines, and successful development of longer-range aircraft. Marshall accepted the timeline. Roosevelt briefed, later that day demanded faster results. Arnold repeated his estimates. Roosevelt asked what resources Arnold needed. Arnold provided a list: expanded production contracts, priority allocation of raw materials, authority to commandeer civilian facilities for training, and increased personnel allocations. Roosevelt approved all requests. Within days, War Department directives allocated unlimited priority to aircraft production. Automobile factories began converting to bomber production. Civilian airports were designated as training facilities. The expansion accelerated. The scale of expansion over the next 4 years is documented in production statistics. In 1942, American factories produced 47,836 aircraft. In 1943, 85,898 aircraft. In 1944, 96,318 aircraft. In 1945, 46,001 aircraft through August. Total 276,053 aircraft produced during the war. Of these, 35,743 were B-17s and B-24s, 4-engine heavy bombers for strategic bombing. Another 18,188 were medium bombers, B-25 Mitchells and B-26 Marauders. Another 99,950 were fighters, P-38s, P-40s, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs. The remainder were transports, trainers, reconnaissance aircraft, and specialized types. The production curve illustrates Arnold's planning. Production in 1942 focused on training aircraft and existing designs. Production in 1943-44 shifted to frontline combat types as factories completed conversion and workers gained experience. By 1944, American aircraft production exceeded German, Japanese, British, and Soviet production combined. The industrial advantage was overwhelming. But production alone was insufficient. Aircraft required pilots. Arnold expanded pilot training from 30,000 graduates per year in 1941 to 65,000 per year in 1943. The training pipeline required building airfields, manufacturing trainers, recruiting instructors, and developing curriculum. Arnold standardized training: primary flight school for basic skills, basic flight school for military procedures, advanced flight school for combat techniques, operational training for specific aircraft types. The complete pipeline took 12 months. By 1944, the Army Air Forces was producing more pilots per year than all other combatant nations combined. Aircraft and pilots required logistics. Arnold established a global supply system: depots in England for European operations, depots in India and China for Asian operations, depots in Australia for Pacific operations. Each depot stocked spare parts, fuel, ammunition, and specialized equipment for every aircraft type operating in that theater. The depots were supplied by transport aircraft, C-47s and C-54s, flying scheduled routes like civilian airlines. By 1944, Air Transport Command operated more cargo aircraft on more routes than any civilian airline. The system moved 700,000 tons of supplies per year. Arnold also developed doctrine. American strategic bombing doctrine emphasized precision daylight bombing, attacking specific industrial targets with visual bomb sites in clear weather. This differed from British area bombing at night. Arnold believed precision bombing was more effective and more defensible morally. American bombers would target factories, oil refineries, rail yards, and military installations, not cities. Civilian casualties would be minimized. The doctrine required technological development. The Norden bomb sight, introduced in 1941, allowed bombardiers to calculate bomb trajectories, accounting for altitude, airspeed, wind, and target motion. The bomb sight was classified top secret. It enabled bombing accuracy of 300 to 500 feet from 25,000 feet altitude under ideal conditions. In practice, clouds, smoke flak, and enemy fighters reduced accuracy. But the Norden bomb sight was substantially more accurate than any previous system. Arnold authorized creation of the 8th Air Force in January 1942 for operations against Germany from bases in England. The 8th Air Force began operations in August 1942 with small raids on targets in occupied France. The early raids tested tactics and equipment. Losses were acceptable, below 5% per mission. Damage to targets was minimal, but the operational principle was proven. American bombers could reach European targets and return. The first deep penetration raid into Germany occurred on January 27, 1943, Wilhelmshaven, a naval base 400 miles from English bases. 91 B-17s participated. 3 were lost. The raid demonstrated that unescorted bombers could penetrate German airspace and survive. Arnold interpreted this as validation of strategic bombing doctrine. He ordered expansion of the 8th Air Force to 1,000-ton heavy bombers. The validation proved premature. On August 17, 1943, the 8th Air Force conducted simultaneous raids on ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt and aircraft factories in Regensburg, targets deep in southern Germany, beyond fighter escort range. The raids involved 376 B-17s. 60 were shot down, a 16% loss rate. Another 168 were damaged. The losses were unsustainable. At 16% loss rates, bomber crews would not survive their required 25 mission tours. Morale collapsed. Operational tempo decreased. Arnold's doctrine appeared to be failing. The problem was fighter escort. B-17s and B-24s carried defensive armament, 10 to 13 50-caliber machine guns, but this was insufficient against German fighters attacking in coordinated formations. Bombers needed escort fighters to suppress German interceptors. But no American fighter had sufficient range to escort bombers to targets in southern Germany and return. The P-47 Thunderbolt had a combat radius of 400 miles. The P-38 Lightning had 500 miles. Schweinfurt and Regensburg were 600 miles from English bases. Arnold ordered development of long-range escort fighters. North American Aviation proposed modifying the P-51 Mustang, originally designed for ground attack, by installing drop tanks and replacing the Allison engine with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The modifications increased range to 850 miles combat radius, sufficient to escort bombers anywhere in Germany. Arnold allocated resources for immediate production. The first P-51Bs entered service in December 1943. By March 1944, the 8th Air Force had sufficient P-51s to provide escort for all deep penetration missions. The impact was immediate. Loss rates dropped from 10 to 16% in late 1943 to 3.5% in spring 1944. German fighters previously able to attack bomber formations continuously now faced American escort fighters with superior performance. The P-51 was faster, more maneuverable, and longer-ranged than German Bf-109s and FW-190s. American fighter pilots developed tactics exploiting these advantages. By summer 1944, the Luftwaffe was losing air superiority over Germany. German day fighters avoided combat with American escorts, allowing bombers to reach targets unmolested. Arnold expanded operations. The 15th Air Force was established in Italy in November 1943, providing a southern axis for bombing German industry. Combined, the 8th and 15th Air Forces conducted 2,000 bomber raids on single targets. The raids in February-March 1944, Big Week, targeted German aircraft production. The raids destroyed assembly plants, forced dispersion of production, and inflicted heavy losses on German fighters attempting interception. German aircraft production recovered but never reached projected levels. The disruption delayed introduction of jet aircraft and advanced piston fighters that might have challenged Allied air superiority. Arnold's management of the strategic bombing campaign involved constant adaptation. When precision bombing proved ineffective due to weather and smoke, Arnold authorized radar-guided bombing through clouds. When ball-bearing plants proved resilient due to stockpiles and alternative suppliers, Arnold shifted targeting to oil refineries and transportation networks. When German fighters developed tactics to exploit bomber vulnerabilities, Arnold accelerated P-51 deployment and authorized fighter sweeps ahead of bomber formations. This adaptive approach, adjusting tactics and resources based on operational results, contrasted with Harris's rigid commitment to area bombing. Arnold was committed to strategic bombing as concept, but flexible about methods. If precision bombing worked, use precision bombing. If escort fighters were necessary, develop escort fighters. If weather prevented visual bombing, use radar. The goal was destroying German war-making capacity by whatever means proved effective. The effectiveness of the strategic bombing campaign against Germany remains debated among historians. German production continued increasing until summer 1944 despite sustained bombing. But the counterfactual what German production would have been without bombing is unknowable. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey conducted after the war concluded that bombing reduced German production by 10 to 15% below potential levels and forced diversion of resources to air defense. Whether this justified the cost, 400 American bombers lost 79,000 aircrew casualties, is debatable. Arnold believed the campaign was effective and vindicated strategic bombing doctrine. German industrial capacity was damaged, German transportation networks were crippled, German oil production was destroyed, grounding the Luftwaffe and immobilizing panzer divisions. These effects contributed to Allied victory, even if they did not independently cause German defeat. In the Pacific theater, Arnold faced different challenges. Japan was 6,000 miles from the nearest American base. Strategic bombing of Japanese home islands required aircraft with ranges exceeding any existing bomber. Arnold authorized development of the B-29 Superfortress, a 4-engine bomber with 3,250-mile range, 20,000-pound bomb load, and pressurized cabin, allowing operations at 30,000 feet altitude above most Japanese fighters and flak. The B-29 was the most complex aircraft developed during the war. The pressurization system, remote-controlled gun turrets, and high-altitude engines all required technological innovations. Development was troubled. Early prototypes crashed. Engines overheated, the aircraft was overweight and underpowered. But Arnold pushed development aggressively. He allocated unlimited resources. He personally supervised testing. He overruled engineers who recommended delaying production until problems were solved. Arnold ordered production to begin while development continued, a risk that paid off when modifications corrected most problems by mid-1944. The first B-29 combat mission occurred on June 5, 1944, bombing Bangkok from bases in India. The mission was symbolic, demonstrating B-29 capability but logistically unsustainable. B-29s based in India had to fly over the Himalayas to reach targets in China, Japan, or Southeast Asia. The distances were prohibitive. Arnold shifted B-29 operations to the Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tini, and Guam, captured in summer 1944. The Marianas were 1,500 miles from Tokyo within B-29 range. The XD-12 Bomber Command, established in the Marianas in October 1944, conducted strategic bombing of Japanese industry and cities. The campaign began with precision daylight raids on aircraft factories and munitions plants. Results were disappointing. Japanese industry was dispersed in small workshops throughout cities, making precision targeting ineffective. Losses to fighters and flak were acceptable, but damage to targets was minimal. In March 1945, Major General Curtis LeMay, commanding 51st Bomber Command, shifted tactics to low-altitude night incendiary raids on cities. The raids deliberately targeted urban areas filled with wooden structures. The objective was destroying industrial capacity by burning the workshops where production occurred. The raids also killed enormous numbers of civilians. The Tokyo raid on March 9 and 10, 1945, killed approximately 100,000 civilians, the highest death toll from any single air raid in history. Arnold approved LeMay's tactics. He understood the raids would kill civilians. He believed the raids were necessary to force Japanese surrender without invasion. Arnold had reviewed casualty estimates for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan's home islands. The estimates projected 250,000 to 500,000 American casualties. Arnold believed that incendiary raids killing Japanese civilians might force surrender, saving American lives. The moral calculation was explicit. Japanese civilian deaths were acceptable if they prevented American military casualties. This calculation was similar to Harris's justification for area bombing of Germany. But Arnold's situation differed in one critical respect. Precision bombing of Japan had been attempted and failed. Japan's dispersed industrial structure made precision targeting ineffective. The incendiary raids were adopted after precision bombing proved inadequate, not as initial doctrine. Whether this distinction justifies the incendiary raids is debatable. But Arnold's decision-making process differed from Harris's. Arnold adapted tactics to achieve strategic objectives. Harris maintained tactics despite contrary evidence. The incendiary campaign against Japan lasted from March through August 1945. 67 Japanese cities were bombed with approximately 330,000 civilians killed. The raids destroyed approximately 40% of urban area in targeted cities. Japanese industrial production collapsed. Transportation networks disintegrated. Food distribution failed. By August 1945, Japan's economy was shattered and its population was starving. Whether the incendiary raids caused Japanese surrender is uncertain. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6 and 9, Soviet entry into the war on August 8, and the cumulative effects of blockade, conventional bombing, and military defeat all contributed to the decision to surrender. Arnold believed the incendiary campaign would have forced surrender even without atomic weapons. This belief is counterfactual and unprovable. What is certain is that Arnold authorized operations killing hundreds of thousands of civilians. He made this decision deliberately, understanding the consequences, believing the deaths were necessary. Whether the belief was correct depends on whether one accepts that shortening the war by killing enemy civilians is morally justified. Arnold accepted this premise. His critics reject it. Arnold's personal cost was measurable. He suffered his first heart attack in February 1943 while testifying before Congress. He was hospitalized for 3 weeks. His physicians recommended reduced duties. Arnold refused. He returned to full duties immediately after discharge. He suffered a second heart attack in May 1943. Again hospitalized. Again he returned to full duties against medical advice. The third heart attack occurred in February 1944. This one was more serious. Arnold was hospitalized for 6 weeks. Roosevelt personally ordered Arnold to take extended leave. Arnold complied reluctantly, spending March-April 1944 in Florida recuperating. He returned to Washington in May just before D-Day. His physicians warned that continued stress would kill him. Arnold acknowledged the risk but stated he could not step down while the war continued. The fourth heart attack occurred in January 1945. Arnold was attending a conference at Yalta when he collapsed. He was evacuated to Walter Reed Hospital and remained hospitalized for 2 months. This time his physicians were absolute continued service would result in fatal heart attack within months. Arnold finally agreed to reduce his schedule. He delegated operational authority to his deputies while retaining strategic oversight. Arnold's health problems reflected the immense stress of his position. He commanded 2.4 million personnel, managed production of 300,000 aircraft, coordinated operations on 4 continents, fought bureaucratic battles with the Navy and Army, testified before Congress, briefed Roosevelt and Churchill, and carried personal responsibility for tens of thousands of casualties. The work was relentless. Arnold typically worked 16-hour days, 7 days per week. He slept poorly, he smoked heavily, he drove himself without mercy. The question of whether Arnold's personal sacrifice was necessary is complicated. Other commanders managed large organizations without suffering multiple heart attacks. Eisenhower commanded more personnel with less apparent health cost. But Arnold's role was different. Eisenhower commanded existing forces executing established doctrine. Arnold was simultaneously building forces, developing doctrine, managing production, and conducting operations. The scope was larger and the timeline more compressed. Arnold also faced unique bureaucratic challenges. The Army Air Forces remained technically a branch of the Army through 1947. Arnold had to negotiate constantly with Army leadership for autonomy and resources. The Navy controlled naval aviation and resisted unified air command. The British advocated different strategic bombing doctrine. Arnold fought continuous battles to maintain the independence and resource priority of the Army Air Forces. These battles consumed time and energy beyond operational demands. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, Arnold had achieved his vision. The Army Air Forces was the largest and most powerful air force in the world, 2.4 million personnel, 79,908 aircraft in service operations on 6 continents. American air power had achieved strategic effects that Arnold predicted in 1938: destruction of enemy industry, command of the Shire, support for ground operations. The doctrine of strategic bombing was validated at least to Arnold's satisfaction. But validation came at enormous cost. The Army Air Forces lost 119 personnel killed in action. Another 173 were wounded. The strategic bombing campaigns killed approximately 400,000 600,000 German civilians and 330,000 Japanese civilians. Whether these deaths were necessary or whether alternative strategies could have achieved victory with lower casualties is counterfactual and unanswerable. Arnold believed the deaths were necessary. He believed strategic bombing shortened the war. He believed that destroying enemy industrial capacity and morale hastened surrender. He believed that American casualties avoided justified enemy casualties inflicted. These beliefs sustained him through 4 heart attacks, 4 years of relentless work, and the knowledge that his orders killed hundreds of thousands of people. After the war, Arnold advocated for an independent Air Force separate from the Army. The National Security Act of 1947 established the United States Air Force as an independent service. Arnold retired from active duty in March 1946, promoted to General of the Air Force 5-star rank. He was the only Air Force officer to hold this rank during his lifetime. Arnold spent his retirement writing his memoirs and advocating for air power. He warned about Soviet bombers and advocated for jet aircraft development and nuclear weapons delivery capability. He died on January 15, 1950, at age 63 of a 5th heart attack. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His tombstone reads, General of the Air Force. Arnold's legacy is the United States Air Force itself. The institutional structure, the strategic doctrine, the global reach, the technological emphasis all derive from Arnold's leadership during World War II. The modern Air Force operates the world's largest fleet of strategic bombers, maintains global airlift capability, and advocates for air power as a decisive independent force. These characteristics reflect Arnold's vision: translated into permanent institutions. Whether the vision was correct, whether air power can win wars independently, remains debated. The strategic bombing campaigns of World War II did not independently cause Axis defeat. They contributed to victory, but ground forces and naval forces were equally or more important. Modern conflicts suggest that air power is necessary but insufficient for victory. Precision strikes can destroy infrastructure and kill leadership, but occupying territory and controlling populations require ground forces. Arnold would likely argue that this misunderstands air power's role. Air power is not about occupation, but about destruction. The goal is destroying enemy capacity to resist, forcing surrender without invasion. Whether this goal is achievable depends on enemy determination and whether surrender is politically possible. Germany and Japan surrendered when further resistance was militarily impossible and politically untenable. Whether bombing hastened this point or merely added to cumulative pressure is unprovable. What is provable is that Arnold built the industrial and organizational capacity for strategic air power. The production planning, the training pipelines, the logistic systems, the operational concepts, these were Arnold's achievements. He took an air force of 2,846 aircraft and built an air force of 80,000 aircraft in 4 years. This accomplishment was organizational and industrial as much as military. Arnold was a manager and planner as much as a commander. This dual-role operational commander and industrial manager was Arnold's defining characteristic. He understood that modern warfare required industrial capacity, not just military prowess. He understood that building aircraft factories was as important as training pilots. He understood that logistics determined operational capability. This systems-level understanding, treating air power as an integrated system of production, training, logistics, and operations, was Arnold's intellectual contribution. The human cost of building this system was measurable. 119 American aircrew killed approximately 730,930 students or enemy civilians killed in bombing campaigns Arnold authorized or supported. Whether the system's capabilities justified these costs depends on whether one believes the strategic bombing campaigns shortened the war and saved lives overall. Arnold believed they did. His critics believe they did not. The judgment is complicated by counterfactuals. If the bombing campaigns had not occurred, would the war have lasted longer? Would American casualties have been higher in a delayed or larger invasion of Japan? Would Soviet forces have occupied more of Europe or Asia, changing post-war political outcomes? These questions have no definitive answers. What is definitive is the organization Arnold built. The United States Air Force exists because Arnold fought for independence from the Army. Strategic bombing doctrine remains central to Air Force identity because Arnold advocated for it. Long-range power projection remains an American military capability because Arnold developed the industrial base and logistic systems to support it. These are Arnold's lasting achievements. Whether the achievements justified 4 heart attacks, 119. American deaths and hundreds of thousands of enemy civilian deaths is a question Arnold answered affirmatively. Every day he commanded the Army Air Forces. He believed in air power as doctrine, as capability, and as institutional necessity. He built the systems to realize this vision. He drove himself to physical collapse doing so. He accepted the human cost as necessary. At 0830 hours on December 7, 1941, Arnold received the telephone call reporting Pearl Harbor. Within hours, he was calculating what was needed: more aircraft, more pilots, more bases, more logistics, more industrial capacity, more organizational scale. The calculations were correct. The expansion occurred, the vision was realized. But vision realized does not mean vision validated. The strategic bombing campaigns that Arnold enabled and supported killed nearly 1 million civilians without achieving the decisive independent victory that doctrine predicted. Air power contributed to victory, but did not cause victory. The cost was enormous. The benefit was real, but not decisive. Arnold died, believing he was right. History suggests he was partially correct. He built an institution and a capability that remained dominant 75 years later. But the doctrine that motivated the building that air power can win wars independently through strategic bombing remains unproven. The bombers can destroy cities. Whether destroying cities forces surrender depends on factors beyond bombing: political will, alternative options, cultural attitudes toward death and defeat. These factors were present in 1945 when Germany and Japan surrendered. Whether they will be present in future conflicts is unknowable. Arnold's legacy is the capability to conduct strategic bombing at global scale. Whether that capability should be used as Arnold intended remains an open question that each generation must answer for itself. The man who built the Air Force believed absolutely in what he built. The belief sustained him through 4 heart attacks and 4 years of war. Whether the belief was wisdom or conviction, vision or dogma, prophecy or illusion, is the question history has not yet answered and perhaps never will.